started some time ago. So we have now a clinical trials regulation which creates a common EU portal. We have the medical device. A lot is happening in the medical devices. We will have also more streamlined data. Of course, we have the HTA regulation. I will talk about a little bit about this. There is also a lot of discussions on crisis preparedness, and certainly, Elena, the conference that you had these days was certainly mentioned. The European health status space, which I think is very important as creating a kind of umbrella, kind of basis as well. But Elena will talk in detail about that. It's very important, I think, also for the regulatory activities that we have to do. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act, also very relevant. We discussed this morning in my session. And of course, there is the reform of the EU pharmaceutical legislation, which also tries to connect a number of elements that exist. One very concrete word on the health technology assessment, which is a little bit the title of our session. So we are in Europe. We are 27 member states plus 3 countries that are part of the European Economic Area, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. So these 30 countries have been working together in many areas. Now we have a new system that will start in 65 days or something like that, the 12th of January 2025. So it will start creating a common assessment. There will be a new development, which is a common clinical assessment of evidence for all these countries. This is very important, it's very relevant, and will have, I think, a lot of impact. We'll start with the cancer drugs and the DMPs, as you see there, and then gradually we'll move into all the medicines that will be authorized at European level in 2030. So in these 5 years, we'll move to orphan drugs and then to the rest in 2030. This will cover medicines and medical devices. We will go quicker on medicines. We'll go more gradually on medical devices. I will not go into much details. There is a governance system. It's a system based on member states, so it's something a little bit different. It's not if I would be, I'm not from the Commission, so I'm from a member state, but the Commission will say this is not a pure community system because it's driven by member states. So there is a new body called the Member States Coordination Group, which will be responsible for conducting the assessment. And if you see in this square up there, you see 4 blocks. 2 on the left, which mean the main work, joint clinical assessment and joint scientific advice or joint scientific consultations. But then you see in the middle as well, the looking at emerging technologies, where it's also very relevant to consider that. There will be, of course, connection with all the stakeholders. The agencies at national level here, you allow me to be probably pushing to my personal involvement. We have decided to create a heads of HTA agencies group, so to support the development and to ensure that this system is really achieving the purpose. So it's a strategic platform for more looking at the implementation of the system, but going a little bit beyond areas where Elena is working. There are some pictures I will pass very quickly because they are a bit different from probably we are nowadays. These are myself and my 2 colleagues. It's the Swedish agency and the French agency. You can see it's not secret. And I think here I will probably conclude. So these are the goals of the pharmaceutical legislation that are now in discussion. What I wanted to highlight is because this review of the legislation is also putting some objectives which are a bit different from what used to be, which is the focus on availability, on access, and also on sustainability, which of course needs also to have more tools than the ones we have today. Of course, there are also the 3 points that are in the second line, which are also very, very relevant. And I think here is these are some of the points in the proposal. I will not spend time now, and then I just wanted to conclude by this trying to connect now with Elena. Excuse me, because this is in official European languages anyway. So, talking about Infarmed, where we are also involved in some initiatives which are let's say bridging the use of data with the purpose of what the decision we have to take. So I said there is the European health data space, which is very important. We have also at the level of the medicines agencies in Europe. So the European medicines agencies and the national agencies created a governance for the data, for the utilization of the data with the purpose of regulatory. There is this HMA, EMA Joint Big Data Steering Group. There is a concrete initiative called Darwin that is really focused on that. We had last year in our annual conference a presentation from the colleagues from the EMA on this. I have here reference to Chessman because there is also the importance of using data in relation to availability, to look into this problem we have, which is the problems with availability of certain products that do not always are in Europe. And we are also now involved in another project which is called Real for Reg, which is coordinated by our colleagues from Germany, from the BfArM, which is concretely looking into real-world data and also artificial intelligence. And though it's a pilot that is trying to look into aspects. One is what data we have, if our systems are prepared, or we can make them prepared to have access to the data, and also how they can then be used in concrete areas. We have selected, I think, two areas. One is multiple sclerosis, the other one I cannot remember now, but this is just to show that there are some concrete initiatives that we are doing and that we are pursuing, which I think is important. I think I conclude here, Elena, and then I pass to you. So because the time is not also too much, I'm trying to close, but I don't know how to find the mouse. I cannot move it. Okay. So you close the file. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much. Also, thank you to being great hosts in Portugal, because we just finished with 3,500 people, the 17th annual European Public Health Conference. Sometimes public health and healthcare do not cross-talk so much, and regulatory agencies, public health specialists, clinicians, medical informaticians do not also cross-talk, and you are a very divergent audience. So you heard a little bit about developments in the European setting with global implications, I think, for data considerations, data generation, evidence synthesis. I will try to be as broad as possible. There are many slides. I will go through them quickly. Most of them are there because the presentations will be available later on as reference points. Just to quickly say that I think it's a uniquely, let me put a timer because I don't want to go over time. It's a unique time in the European setting, because there are many projects coming together. In the last slide that Rui had, you saw Darwin, which already in the European Medicines Agency, in a closed group, we are looking at for shortages, primary care data for GLP-1 antagonists. So things like metformin or Ozempic, which you all know, with massive impact, to see why shortages happen, what should be compensated. And the particular session or the new one, Chessman, also on shortages, because, with COVID, we started discussing issues of regional autonomy, and data is a very big part of safeguarding regional autonomy and ensuring preparedness. So I will try to give you a big, wear different hats, indeed, sorry, but I hope this is beneficial for having a broad perspective, but here I'm expressing my own views. So we are at a time where evidentiary requirements, both for regulatory decision-making, but also for clinical decision-making, for policy decision-making, for all the levels is radically changing. You hear a lot about big data, but also real-world data, which is a little bit different. And the question that arises traditionally is whether something is safe and whether something is effective. And of course, this is, as you saw, we are in Europe, we want to have fair allocation, also globally, of very limited resources. And because we not sit in silos, you also want to have good innovation reward. You really want to identify what innovation is in an ecosystem. And ultimately, you want to safeguard the interest of public health, not only through healthcare mechanisms and so on, but in the broader well-being of a society. And this, of course, is very tricky because you have conflicting perspectives. I think in the previous panel, somebody said the most important stakeholder is the clinician, perhaps for a surgery, but actually the most important stakeholder at the moment is a citizen, any citizen, a person, because with wearables, with apps, the data is there, and as you will see it in my slides, autonomy of data is becoming very important. And then, of course, there is some confusion on HTA, and I think traditionally, particularly because we had the situation, including in the industry and in governance across countries, HTA was seen as solely a health economics thing, or you get the clinical data and you add some budget impact locally and so on. But actually, HTA is a very comprehensive tool. I don't know how familiar you all are with it. There's not a definition there, but if you put HTA definition, we managed to have with HTAi for a pan-society definition. Very briefly, HTA wants to look at clinical aspects, but not only. You want to look at legal considerations. You want to see how an intervention is going to be delivered in a particular setting. You want to have ethical aspects there. And of course, critically, you want to know how to use this decision-making across a life cycle approach, because the decision you make on the 1st of March 2024 may be not valid in a few months or in a few years' time. And then, of course, critically, we have data sharing aspects, because clinical trials may be happening in China, but approval may be happening in the US or in Europe, and progressively this becomes more and more prominent. And then, of course, because I am the chair of RWNAI, AI is a very big, very fashionable term, but AI has been there for a very long time. In terms of ML, machine learning has been there for a very long time. And interestingly, if you look at investments, last year was the first year that it went radically down. And I think people do not realize that. What is also a little bit stressful and frustrating, because trust is very big, you find that the annual report came out last year. The only country in which you see a substantial percentage for confidence of citizens on AI is actually China, which I find a little bit disconcerting. I think we should be doing better in Europe, but there you have it. Now, going forward, we mentioned, of course, it's a critical time. We have the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation, we have the EU regulation on artificial intelligence, and we have the HTA regulation. But at the same time, along also with the HDS and so on, we have some smaller things happening. We have the EU Cybersecurity Act and NIS, we have jurisprudence coming out, and this changes definitions. It's in the slides later on, but you will see that there was a draft paper from the European Medicines Agency on AI, and then the AI Act came out. And what actually is a high-risk device and how we classify devices had to a little bit be rephrased. So a lot of things are in the definition. At the moment, I think it's quite good that we're starting to look at aspects of competitiveness and regional autonomy, and also maybe because of the internet, or maybe because we're starting to have a cross-fertilization between stakeholders. Most of the things are transparent. You can access this information, but for some reason, we don't have the ecosystem where we all go to exchange this. Now, this is as of Wednesday afternoon. Of course, it's indicative, but it's the implementation of the European Health Data Space Regulation. This is important because there are two joint actions coming out. They're ongoing, and basically they tackle primary use of data and secondary use of data. And of course, secondary use of data is all the rage, because can you really use patient data that was generated for purpose A, for purpose B, C, D? But there are other aspects that have to do with primary primary uses of health data that have to do with how a patient may want or not to use their data, patient-led trials, decentralized trials, and so on. And finally, of course, critically, the word interoperability is mentioned many times. What we do with the tremendous fragmentation of electronic health records. And how we harvest this information. So there are different things that are happening. This is a mapping of the projects that are actually ongoing beyond HTA, but also cross-talking with us. Some you may have heard because they have been there for some time, like EPSOS, but Expand, DH, and ECSHA are looking at the interoperability and at the label of how we can have an exchange format that can be cross-talking at all the levels of care across countries. And of course, there's My Health EU, with many countries, France, Cyprus, Portugal. I mean, I think all the countries are there, but different cases are being developed. Some have to do with patient data exchange within one country, others have to do within a particular hospital setting, and so on and so forth. Now, if somebody wanted to have HTAs in a nutshell, for primary use of data, you want to be able to deliver the healthcare. For the secondary use of data, it's a little bit more fascinating because you have public health aspects, public interest purposes, reasons and grounds to utilize this, and of course, research and development and innovation in the ecosystem. And the idea, of course, when we are in the European Union, to have a single market for electronic health record system, including for competitiveness, including for facilitating access, timely access critically. Going forward, I have the slide that is from the Commission meeting on Tuesday afternoon, which is revisiting the rights of natural persons, because this is already there for the registration of data. And because there are some aspects on patient autonomy that are not always well understood, but have a lot to do with looking at what HTA can use in a particular country, in a particular hospital. We have HTA at different levels. The macro level, which is, a centralized HTA that we mentioned, and its implementation starts in the second week of 2025 initially for very expensive, very innovative oncological products, orphan drugs, and so on. And then we move over to devices, but also for aspects when you want to HTA at perhaps meso level or even micro level in a particular setting, hospital setting, or even small region. So yes, there are further down my slides, there are some examples of the case studies we are currently doing, and we are cross-talking with the Federation of Medical Informatics and the EMEA, so in the International Medical Informatics Association, to see how to move forward, not just the case studies of interoperability, but to see how we go for intersecting regulatory pieces to centralize and so on. I will quickly move through this to go to this. So, yes. First, the researchers came out and said to FDA, you have a lot of AI-enabled technologies, and what you do with it. That started in 21, 22, 23. FDA was producing different pieces of a draft regulation or RWE, the AMA at the same time. And then a couple of months ago, the term AI-enabled, which is not a European term, we have some definitional issues in Europe, but the AI-enabled was solidified within the US setting and also starting to be used by the third sector. And, sorry, here we go. And in October, FDA decided to release a paper and discuss a life cycle approach. And real-world evidence and performance evaluation is very much embedded in this. So starting with planning and design, data collection starts at even the preclinical stage, and then model building and testing. And I think some of you may have heard a few things about augmented models of synthetic data, potentially from Shirley Wang a couple of days ago. So the emphasis is on life cycle approach, on verification and validation of models and model deployment and operational monitoring. And if you look at the EMA's paper, perhaps the verbiage is different, but the approach overall is very similar. And the emphasis is on the fact we cannot consider HTA at one point in time as a one-off thing. We're going towards iterative cycle, and this necessitates to move beyond interoperability considerations quickly and in an agile way. Very importantly, in the previous panel, you heard the effort that is happening in other regions for having a gateway for data and for information and empowering your countries, your member states, your citizens, and moving towards recurrent local post-market performance and monitoring, not traditional as we used to do for safety and regular, but also for effectiveness and for seeing where you disinvest, where you reinvest, and and move and so on. And then, of course, quickly on decentralized trials, I have put 3 examples you may want to look at closer and think from your perspective, be it pharmaceutical or devices and so on. The quality of evidence and volume of data is exploding, of course, but the combination thereof, a lot of work needs to be done. So some of the case studies with the regulatory agencies are already out there. You can see them, here. One that we're looking at is patient data translation, because we said 23 languages, maybe more, because doctors and patients talk different languages as well. So you can see some of the scenarios. You have a QR code for an Italian document, you go there, you have different terminology in France. So you think of ontologies, NOMED, CD, IDC, and so on, but the patient also has to be able to access this. And then, of course, within HTA, we're also looking at data exchange. So a different kind of scenario, because here you may have just one country, but different healthcare settings and different electronic health records, different applications, and different episodes of care that are fragmented. I mean, in Greece, but also I'm happy to say in Germany, because I've lived there for many years, people go around still with big paper folders, particularly chronic patients. I recently became a carer, and I was shocked because people still move around in Greece, but in many other countries, with massive files and carry their paper and so on. And I think that's something to consider. And finally, very importantly, because we see these hospital systems coming out, these conglomerates, which are basically delivering care different ways. And along with them, of course, you have big CROs. I saw IQVIA in the Summit Knowledge Part, a tremendous port of data, tremendous. So you want to go further, and you want to see how you're going to go to have exchange across borders to facilitate the mobility of people, but also to facilitate development of solutions for the people, and to have data quickly imported and utilized when needed. Again, safeguarding patient autonomy. And then backwards again. There we go. So for HTA in particular, as I said, HTA is this decision-making tool. There are at least 4 concrete aspects, and I think some of the partners I see in the summit have worked on this. At HTA, we have done a number of seminars. We have one focusing on AI in November, and by amazing coincidence, Paul, and we have the Global Policy Forum in Cascais again in January. So you can do cohort selection, you can do outcome estimation, you can do economic evaluation, evidence synthesis, but whether your results are valid, how often you need to check your algorithms transparently, how you need to co-create potentially mechanisms of transparency and trust. These are all aspects to discuss. And going forward, this is what we're focusing on at the moment. So as many case studies of RW and AI, looking at the role of the European Electronic Exchange Record formatting pilots, looking at how HTA changes. There are a few projects to increase capacity for the regulation, as Rui said, for HTAR, like sustain, but they are very limited efforts. So you try to build through other project synergies and at different levels. A Greek doctor, a Greek GP in Crete is not likely to benefit very much from a webinar in English in Brussels. So different efforts, academic efforts, NSA efforts or NGO efforts like the Hague, Flora, I think we have Flora from us in Greece in the Hague. So very critical for increasing capacity and opening up dialogue so we have common language. And then finally, importantly, an iterative process. And last but certainly not least, sorry, I'm going up and down, because we are no longer a section. Actually, the Global Health Initiative started with 10 people, we went to 941, so within a year. So we're very happy, so it's a section, so happy to be president of that. This is a very forgotten and not well-known aspect, but it's very important for Europe. Europe now has a global health strategy as of last year, with missing actioning points, but with tremendous potential for impact in the world. There is a well-established but not very well-used regulatory reliance mechanisms between the EMA, different EU agencies to support Africa, who now has its own regulatory agency. It's being built, let us say, along with the African CDC. You have the African Medicines Agency, and traditionally you leave the autonomy of the country, you respect the sovereignty of the country, and you allow it to remain responsible and accountable, but you increase capacity because also for preparedness and public health, you want to have data from these areas as well. You want to have pathogen data sharing, you want to see what the needs are. You even may want to have reverse innovation. Very neglected topics, But when it comes to HTA, we are nowhere near looking at these aspects, and we are not brokering that global dialogue. It's globalization, but really the dialogue is of the North-South is not how it should be. I see some people shaking hands. This is a very big issue, so forgive me for going a little bit over time, Paul, with this. A role for WHO, but also other agencies in the United Nations. So we have some interaction with WIPO, intellectual property in WTO, but I think this information doesn't flow, doesn't cascade down to everyone. So thank you very much, and we're more than happy to provide more information.
Thank you so much for this panel. I'm not sure, given the relevance of this topic, will you allow a few minutes questions? Of course, if you allow, because I think it's a privilege to have such a distinguished guest speakers here. Opening the floor now for moderators, and also in LinkedIn, if you want to comment, I'll try to pass on. Dr. Osama is going to press.
Thank you very much. I really liked your presentation. So we were talking about the dialogue, global dialogue. I think one of the biggest challenges on making an effective dialogue is lack of talents, especially in the southern part of the world. People who knows HTA, who have hands-on digital health and also to medical devices. And so apart from that, my question is when you're talking about the reliance between like LMIC on advanced countries, but maybe before we need to think about how we build a model that can allow portability of AI algorithms. So saying that this is approved in the US, but you need also to have a local clinical trial to make sure that the data is tested locally. So is there any kind of protocol like
Can you hear me? Yes. So absolutely. The mechanism of the reliance is not relying on somebody else's data. The mechanism of reliance is there to facilitate fast, allowing the country not to waste time on tedious aspects, but to give it time and a given country to build its own capacity. And there already, it's in my slides in the links. There's already an effort, not European driven, it's WHO driven for AI. I think you have a Portuguese. You have Ricardo Batista Leite there.
Yes, coming next week to talk.
Yeah. So, and the emphasis is very much on not on relying on what's already there, but on continuously building. I think the trouble is that we have not had fora for dialogue, proper dialogue, and also even in the existing reliance mechanism, you can see the report that the European Medicines Agency and WHO generated a couple of years back. There is very little understanding on how to utilize the mechanism. So the mechanism is contingent on the industry utilizing it. But there has to be some incentivization for the industry to do that and some awareness of what it may offer. So I think because everybody can have a mobile, if we focus more on decentralized trials with transparent mechanisms and case studies, then they can also have data collection, they can have extra incentives, and progressively we start building capacity. And also, this may sound strange, but it's a very dear fact. In Europe also, we have many tiers. You know, we have small countries, more dominant countries. I don't mean that they're dominant politically, although they are in some cases, but I'm talking about technical expertise, talking about capacity and so on. And some things take time. We were discussing very briefly yesterday, when you introduce a centralized mechanism, there is a lot of pushback. So when the centralized authorization procedure for medicines was introduced almost 20 years ago, it took, yes, maybe you want to comment after this, it took almost 10 years to have not 2 or 3 member states active, but to bring on board all the member states. And still, in many countries, the legislation and the regulation do not allow very easily to conduct trials. So if you look at where the trials are conducted, you will find very few countries very active. But for HTA, it would be a similar situation, but you need to start working on this, and this necessitates stakeholders. So events like this bring some awareness and some cross-talking. So, yeah.
Yes, maybe just to add, Elena, I think the implementation of the HTA regulation will probably have a very positive impact in making a bit closer to the member states, because there will be difficulties by having European assessment and then ensuring that this assessment will be completely adapted to be used at national level. I haven't gone into these details, but when we discussed the legislation, Portugal reached the conclusion of this piece of legislation in 2021, and the most difficult discussion was what would be the value of the reports, because and then we came into this with this English expression, which probably only English could have it, that we say the reports should be taken in due consideration. So this is what is written. So you can see that there is still a way to, yes, so in due consideration, a way to go. So it's also a challenge for us to ensure that it's adapted, and probably, as you say, and probably the fact that we need to have a report that will be accepted and meaningful for member states probably also generate other synergies, like in terms of conducting clinical trials, in terms of having, let's say, information that is getting it a bit, yeah, it's population, yes. So this is, so I'm a firm believer that the impact of this piece of legislation will be quite big, gradually. So in the medicine is 30 years this January as well. So it's 30 years already. So we cannot do this immediately. More questions probably. There is
Somewhere in the back.
in the back.
Oh, good question. I'm sure.